I helped him climb every rung of the corporate ladder. I cleared his path through high-stakes meetings, covered his mistakes, and taught him everything I knew. Then he stole the position that should have been mine, spreading lies about my leadership abilities. 10 years later, I orchestrated his complete downfall, and no one ever suspected I was behind it. This is how I did it. My name is Jessica Warren, and at 34, I was everything a senior financial analyst at Braxton & Howe should be: dedicated, meticulous, and foolishly loyal. The Chicago skyline stretched endlessly from our 42nd floor office, and I'd spent countless late nights watching those lights flicker while perfecting quarterly reports and strategic forecasts that kept our Fortune 500 clients coming back. I'd turned down 3 management positions in 5 years. Not because I lacked ambition, but because I believed in something more valuable than titles. I believed in building a team that could outlast any individual. I was the one who stayed after hours to mentor junior analysts, who shared credit even when projects were entirely my brainchild, who celebrated others' victories louder than my own. Thomas Keene joined our team on a humid Tuesday in July, fresh from a mid-tier firm in Boston. He had the kind of nervous energy that reminded me of myself 6 years earlier. His handshake was too firm, his suit slightly ill-fitting, and his knowledge of our proprietary financial modeling systems was non-existent. Jessica Warren, I introduced myself, offering the coffee I'd grabbed from the break room. I'll be showing you the ropes. His relief was palpable. Thomas, thank God someone's actually willing to help. HR just pointed at a desk and disappeared. I laughed, remembering my own bewildering first day. Welcome to Braxton & Howe. Sink or swim, but I'll make sure you have a life jacket. Over the following months, I became his unofficial mentor. When he struggled with complex derivatives pricing, I stayed late to walk him through the calculations. When he fumbled during his first client presentation, I smoothly redirected the conversation and saved the account. I introduced him to key players, decoded office politics, and even helped him apartment hunt when his initial sublease fell through. "You're too good to me," he'd say, bringing me my favorite lavender tea during particularly grueling weeks. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "We're a team," I'd respond, genuinely meaning it. "Your success is my success." By year's end, Thomas had transformed from a stumbling newcomer to a confident analyst. His presentations grew sharper, his analyses more sophisticated. Partners began to notice him, and I felt the quiet pride of a teacher watching a student flourish. We became genuine friends. Or, so I believed. Friday, happy hours at Murphy's Bar, where he'd regale me with stories about his Boston days. Weekend brunches where we'd dissect office dynamics and dream about future projects. He met my boyfriend, David. I met his sister when she visited from Portland. "You know what I admire most about you?" Thomas said one evening, after we'd successfully closed a major acquisition deal. "You never play the game. Everyone else is scheming for promotions, stabbing backs, taking credit, but you just do excellent work and lift others up." I raised my wine glass. "Integrity beats politics every time." "To integrity," he echoed, clinking his glass against mine. Looking back, I wonder if he was already planning. If every question about my methods, every request for my files, every moment I spent teaching him was just intelligence gathering for what would come next. But that night, warmed by wine and success, I simply believed I'd found a true ally in the corporate battlefield. I had no idea I was training my own executioner. The Director of Financial Strategy position opened on a Monday morning in March. Richard Blackwood, our previous director, had taken a CEO role at a startup, leaving behind one of the most coveted positions at Braxton & Howe. The email announcement hadn't been out for 5 minutes before my phone started buzzing with congratulations from colleagues who assumed I was the obvious successor. I'd essentially been doing the job already. For 2 years, I'd led strategic initiatives, managed key client relationships, and mentored half the department. My annual reviews were flawless. The partners knew me by name. When CEO Margaret Howe needed someone to present to the board, she called me directly. "You're applying, right?" David asked that evening as I reviewed the job posting at our kitchen table. Of course, I said, though something in my stomach tightened. Thomas thinks I should go for it too. Thomas had been particularly supportive, even offering to review my application materials. You deserve this more than anyone, he'd said, seemingly genuine. Let me know if you need any references or support. The application process was rigorous. Multiple interviews, case studies, presentations to senior leadership. I spent 3 weeks preparing, crafting a comprehensive vision for the department's future. Thomas helped me practice, asking tough questions and refining my responses. The final interview was with the executive committee. I walked in confident, armed with innovative strategies and proven results. But something felt off. They asked oddly specific questions about a recent client win, a strategic restructuring for Pemberton Industries that had saved them $50 million. Tell us about your role in the Pemberton deal, Margaret Howe said, leaning forward. I launched into the details, explaining how I'd identified the redundancies, built the financial models, and convinced their skeptical CFO. But I noticed exchanged glances, raised eyebrows. Interesting, board member Harrison Clark interjected. Because we were under the impression this was primarily Thomas Keene's initiative. My blood chilled. Thomas was certainly involved, but he presented a quite detailed breakdown of his strategic approach. Clark continued, sliding a document across the table. Very impressive work. I recognized it immediately. My analysis, my models, my words. But at the top, in bold letters, Strategic Restructuring Proposal by Thomas Keene. There must be some confusion, I managed. I created this proposal, Thomas assisted with implementation. But, Ms. Warren. Margaret's voice was sympathetic but firm. We appreciate your contributions, but we need leaders who can own their work without territorial disputes. The rest of the interview blurred. I answered questions mechanically, knowing it was over. The position I'd earned through years of excellence had been stolen with a simple lie. Thomas was waiting in my office when I returned, concern painted across his face. How did it go? I stared at him, searching for signs of guilt, finding none. They asked about Pemberton. Great, that was your best work. His enthusiasm seemed genuine. I made sure to tell them how instrumental you were. The announcement came 2 days later. Thomas Keene, Director of Financial Strategy. The congratulations in his office were deafening. I stood in my doorway, watching colleagues pat his back, watching him accept praise with practiced humility. He caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," as if he'd had nothing to do with it. Sarah Martinez from HR stopped by that afternoon. I know this must be disappointing, she said, closing my door. But between us, some concerns were raised about your leadership style. What concerns? That you might be too collaborative, too soft. Thomas mentioned you often struggle with difficult decisions, that he's had to step in during crucial moments. She touched my shoulder. Maybe this is a sign to consider whether Braxton and Howe is still the right fit for you. Too soft. The words echoed as I sat alone in my office until midnight, staring at 5 years of performance reviews that said otherwise. I pulled up emails, searching for evidence of Thomas's betrayal, but found only my own generosity. Countless messages where I'd included him, credited him, elevated him. He'd played the long game perfectly. Every kindness I'd shown became a weapon. Every door I'd opened became his pathway. And worst of all, he'd made me look like a bitter, delusional colleague trying to claim his success. I drafted my resignation that night, but didn't send it. Not yet. If Thomas thought he'd won, he'd forgotten who taught him everything he knew. I submitted my resignation on a Thursday, keeping it professional and brief. Margaret Howe seemed relieved. One less awkward situation to manage. But I didn't leave empty-handed. During my 2-week notice, I methodically documented everything. Emails where I'd originated ideas Thomas later claimed. Project files with my metadata. Timestamps showing I'd worked on presentations while Thomas was out of office. I forwarded everything to my personal email, built encrypted backups, and created a detailed timeline of his deception. "You're really leaving?" Thomas asked, hovering in my doorway on my last day. He held a farewell card and a bottle of champagne, Veuve Clicquot, the same brand we'd shared after closing our first major deal together. "Best decision for everyone," I replied, not looking up from packing. "Jessica, I hope you know I never wanted." "Save it." I finally met his eyes. "We both know exactly what you wanted." He shifted uncomfortably. "The partners made their choice. I can't help that they saw potential in me." The audacity almost made me laugh. Instead, I smiled. "You're right, and I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. After all, I taught you everything." I left Chicago that day with no plan except to disappear and rebuild. The next 3 years were my education in patience and strategy. I took a position at a smaller firm in Milwaukee, deliberately unglamorous but rich in learning opportunities. I studied corporate law at night, earned certifications in forensic accounting and compliance investigation. Every course, every connection, every skill was a weapon I was sharpening. I befriended Alexandra Voss, a former SEC investigator who'd transitioned to private consulting. Over drinks, she'd share war stories about taking down corrupt executives who thought they were untouchable. "The key," she once told me, "is to let them feel safe. Arrogant people always make mistakes when they think no one's watching." I joined professional networks for corporate whistleblowers and compliance officers, learning how internal investigations worked, what triggered federal scrutiny, how anonymous tips were processed. I studied cases of financial fraud, paying special attention to how evidence trails were constructed and how perpetrators were caught, or how they escaped. My second year, I took a contract position with a company that specialized in corporate ethics audits. It was unglamorous work, combing through expense reports and email chains. But I learned to spot patterns of deception. I understood how workplace investigations unfolded, what made allegations stick, and most importantly, how to remain invisible while gathering intelligence. I kept tabs on Thomas from afar. LinkedIn updates showed his continued rise, director to senior, director to vice president by year 3. He spoke at conferences about authentic leadership and building trust in teams. The irony was suffocating, but I channeled my anger into preparation. David had left during my first year in Milwaukee, unable to understand my transformation from collaborative optimist to solitary strategist. "You're becoming someone I don't recognize," he'd said. He was right. Jessica Warren, the helpful mentor, was dead. In her place was someone far more dangerous, a woman who understood that justice and revenge were sometimes the same thing. I legally changed my last name to Langford, my grandmother's maiden name, and rebuilt my professional identity. New LinkedIn profile, new references from my Milwaukee years, new narrative. Jessica Langford was a compliance specialist with a background in financial services, passionate about corporate ethics and accountability. No connection to Braxton and Howe, no history with Thomas Keene. By year 3, I'd assembled everything: skills, connections, evidence, and a new identity. I founded Maverick Ethical Consulting with 2 partners I'd met through Alexandra, former FBI financial crimes investigators who'd grown tired of bureaucracy. We positioned ourselves as the firm companies hired when they suspected internal wrongdoing but needed discretion. Our reputation grew quickly. We were thorough, confidential, and ruthless in uncovering corporate misconduct. What clients didn't know was that I had a very specific target in mind, and every successful case was just practice for the one that mattered. Late one night, reviewing Thomas's latest LinkedIn update, a self-congratulatory post about 5 years of exceptional leadership at Braxton and Howe, I opened my safe and pulled out the folder I'd compiled on my last day. Email threads, project files, documented lies, evidence that would destroy him. But only if deployed perfectly. Alexandra had been right. Thomas felt safe now, untouchable in his vice president role. He'd forgotten about the analyst he'd stepped on to get there. That would be his downfall. It was time to go home. Not as Jessica Warren, the woman he'd betrayed, but as Jessica Langford, the specialist Braxton and Howe would inevitably hire when their golden boy's sins came to light. The hunt was about to begin. 6 years after my departure, Maverick Ethical Consulting received an unexpected RFP from Braxton & Howe. They needed an external firm to conduct a routine compliance review. Corporate speak for, "We suspect something's wrong but can't investigate internally without causing panic." I knew this day would come. Companies like Braxton & Howe always eventually noticed when numbers didn't quite add up or when whispers of impropriety grew too loud to ignore. I crafted our proposal personally, highlighting Maverick's discretion and our track record with Fortune 500 firms. During the video pitch to their compliance committee, I kept my camera strategically angled, my now shorter, darker hair and designer glasses creating a different silhouette than the Jessica Warren they'd known. My voice, always naturally low. I pitched slightly differently. Small changes that, combined with 6 years of absence, made me unrecognizable. We won the contract. Walking into Braxton & Howe's lobby on that crisp October morning, I felt my heartbeat steady. Jessica Langford, senior compliance consultant, had legitimate business here. The receptionist smiled professionally, issuing a visitor badge without a flicker of recognition. Even the elevator seemed foreign. They'd renovated since my time. The compliance team greeted us in a conference room on the 38th floor. I recognized Janet Morrison, now Chief Compliance Officer. But she showed no sign of remembering the analyst from years ago. We were introduced to key stakeholders who would facilitate our review. When Thomas Keene, Vice President of Financial Strategy, entered the room. I was examining a spreadsheet, my face partially obscured. "Ms. Langford." He extended his hand when introduced. "I've heard excellent things about Maverick's work." I shook it firmly, meeting his eyes behind my glasses. "Mr. Keene, we appreciate your cooperation with this review." Nothing. Not a flicker of recognition. The man who'd stolen my work, my promotion, my faith in corporate fairness, saw me as just another consultant. Perfect. Over the following weeks, my team embedded ourselves in Braxton & Howe's operations. I had legitimate access to financial records, email systems, internal communications, everything I needed. But I was careful. Patient. This wasn't about planting evidence. Thomas had provided plenty of that himself. It was about knowing where to look and how to guide others to find it. During a routine document review, I, accidentally, stumbled upon discrepancies in client billing from the Pemberton Industries account, the very deal Thomas had claimed as his own. The patterns were subtle, hours billed for work done by others, expense reports that didn't match meeting records, strategic recommendations that preceded Thomas's documented involvement. Interesting anomaly. I mentioned casually to Janet Morrison during our weekly check-in. Probably nothing, but the metadata on these strategic documents doesn't align with the billing records. Different creation dates than what was reported. Janet frowned, reviewing the documents. That is odd. What do you recommend? We could dig deeper, but it might be sensitive given Mr. Keene's position. Perhaps just flag it for internal review after we've completed our assessment? No, Janet said firmly. If there's an issue, I want to know now. Expand your scope. I expressed appropriate professional concern. That could be disruptive. Mr. Keene has been very cooperative. That's exactly why we hired external consultants. No internal politics. Do what you need to do. I nodded gravely, hiding my satisfaction. Janet had just given me license to hunt. The beauty of my position was that I didn't need to fabricate anything. Thomas's arrogance had left a trail of breadcrumbs over the years, inflated accomplishments, appropriated work, clients who'd been promised deliverables he couldn't provide without help. He'd grown comfortable, sloppy. The analyst who'd covered his tracks was long gone, and he'd never learned to clean up after himself. I scheduled interviews with long-term employees, asking seemingly routine questions about process and workflow. Many remembered the Pemberton deal differently than the official record suggested. Wasn't Jessica Warren the lead on that? Asked Marcus Chen from IT when I showed him some technical specifications. I remember because she kept requesting server time for those complex models. Thomas was barely involved until the final presentation. I documented everything meticulously, building a careful narrative that any investigator would follow to its inevitable conclusion. The best part was watching Thomas during our status meetings, his confident smile as he assured us of his department's impeccable standards. "Compliance has always been a personal passion," he said during one meeting, leaning back in his executive chair. "Integrity is the foundation of good business." I made notes on my tablet, thinking of the foundation he'd built his career on: lies, stolen work, and the dedication of someone who'd trusted him. That foundation was about to crumble, and he had no idea the wrecking ball was sitting right across from him, taking notes on his every word. The anonymous tip arrived at the SEC on a Tuesday morning, meticulously detailed and impossible to ignore. I knew because I'd crafted it myself, using information gathered legitimately during our compliance review but presented through carefully untraceable channels. The allegations were specific: financial misrepresentation in client reports, taking credit for work performed by others to secure promotions, and potential fraud in billing practices. Simultaneously, I began leaving breadcrumbs for others to find. During a meeting with the junior analysts, I casually mentioned discrepancies I'd noticed. "Strange thing," I said, reviewing some old files. "These Pemberton models show creation dates months before Mr. Keen's official involvement. Must be a system error." Sarah Kim, a sharp analyst who reminded me of my younger self, frowned. "That's not an error. I remember Jessica Warren working on those. She trained me using that exact model." "Jessica Warren?" I feigned ignorance. "She left about 6 years ago, right after—" Sarah trailed off, then looked uncomfortable. "Right after she didn't get the director position." I made a note. "Interesting. Were there other projects with similar timeline discrepancies?" The seed was planted. Sarah began her own investigation, pulling files and comparing dates. She found more instances, a clear pattern of Thomas claiming work that preceded his involvement. Her findings made their way to Janet Morrison, independent of my official report. Meanwhile, I'd established contact with Eliza Moreno, a financial journalist known for exposing corporate malfeasance. Through encrypted messages from an anonymous source, I fed her information about potential irregularities at Braxton and Howe, particularly in their financial strategy division. Nothing that violated my professional obligations, just public records and questions that deserved asking. "My source suggests looking into the rapid promotion of certain executives," I wrote. "Compare their claimed achievements with project timelines and team compositions." The truth is, in the metadata, Eliza was thorough. Within 2 weeks, she'd submitted a detailed inquiry to Braxton and Howe's press office about Thomas Keen's meteoric rise and specific questions about the Pemberton deal. The PR team went into crisis mode. The perfect storm was building. The SEC inquiry triggered an internal investigation. Eliza's questions prompted a defensive press response that only raised more suspicions. Junior employees, emboldened by the investigation, began sharing their own experiences of Thomas taking credit for their work. I orchestrated it all from my position as an external consultant, each action having plausible legitimacy. When Janet Morrison asked me to expand our review to include Thomas's department specifically, I expressed appropriate reluctance. "This could appear targeted," I warned. "Mr. Keen might feel this is becoming personal." "I don't care what he feels," Janet snapped. "The SEC is breathing down our necks, and a journalist is asking questions I can't answer. I need to know what's real and what isn't." The investigation intensified. I guided my team to the right files, the right questions, the right people, always maintaining professional distance. We uncovered a pattern spanning years. Thomas had built his entire leadership narrative on the work of others, particularly one analyst whose contributions had been systematically erased from the record. "Who is this Jessica Warren?" Janet asked during one late-night session, surrounded by evidence of Thomas's deception. "Her name is all over the original work, but she vanishes from the final presentations." I adjusted my glasses. "Former employee, left 6 years ago. According to HR records, she resigned shortly after being passed over for the director position, the one Mr. Keene received. Janet's face darkened. Get me everything, every email, every document, every record of her work. The noose was tightening. Thomas, sensing danger, tried to control the narrative. He called meetings to clarify misunderstandings and attempted to reach out to former colleagues who might support his version of events. But 6 years of hubris had eroded any loyalty he might have commanded. People remembered Jessica Warren's kindness, her mentorship, her dedication. They remembered Thomas's convenient rise. The breakthrough came when Marcus from IT, under official questioning, revealed he'd kept backup logs of all server access. I can show you exactly who was working on what and when, he told investigators. Jessica Warren's login shows hundreds of hours on these projects. Thomas Keene's shows minimal access until the final stages. Eliza Moreno published her first article. Questions arise about executives' rise at prominent Chicago financial firm. She didn't name Thomas directly, legal had been careful, but anyone in the industry could connect the dots. The article mentioned an unnamed analyst whose groundbreaking work had been appropriated, whose career had been derailed by corporate politics. Thomas called an emergency meeting with his leadership team, but the damage was spreading like wildfire. The SEC expanded their investigation. The board demanded answers. And Jessica Langford, external compliance consultant, continued her methodical documentation of everything, preparing a final report that would be devastating in its objective presentation of facts. I watched Thomas leave the office late one evening, his usual swagger replaced by hunched shoulders and darting glances. He looked haunted, as if finally realizing that karma could indeed come calling, even after 6 years. But this wasn't karma. This was justice, served cold and with surgical precision by the very person he'd stepped on to reach his heights. And the beautiful irony? He was paying my consulting fees to orchestrate his own downfall. The final blow came on a Thursday morning. Thomas arrived to find his office sealed, security standing guard. Janet Morrison and 2 board members waited in the conference room with a thick folder, my final report, supplemented by the anonymous whistleblower's evidence that had mysteriously appeared in the company's ethics hotline inbox the night before. I'd sent it from an untraceable server, using every technical skill I'd acquired over 6 years. The package contained the original emails I'd preserved, showing my work with intact metadata, document revision histories that proved Thomas had simply renamed files, time-stamped server logs, even recovered instant messages where Thomas had brazenly discussed his plan with a former colleague who'd since left the company. Mr. Keene, Board Chairman William Rothschild began, his voice arctic. We need to discuss these findings. I watched from the compliance office as Thomas was escorted to that meeting. 3 hours later, he emerged ashen-faced, flanked by security. The announcement went out within minutes. Thomas Keene was suspended pending investigation into serious violations of company ethics and potential fraud. That afternoon, I presented Maverick's final report to the board. Neutral, professional, devastating. I outlined systemic failures in verification processes that had allowed someone to build a career on stolen achievements. I recommended comprehensive reforms, better documentation standards, and crucially, a full audit of all promotions and achievements claimed over the past decade. This is exemplary work, Ms. Bars. Langford, Margaret House said, though she looked aged by the scandal. Your team has been thorough and discreet. We simply followed the evidence, I replied. The truth has a way of surfacing, even after years of burial. The next week brought Thomas's termination. The legal department discovered he'd been inflating client billing for years, skimming the excess into discretionary funds he controlled. What started as stealing credit had evolved into actual theft. The FBI opened an investigation. His assets were frozen pending civil suits from deceived clients. Eliza Moreno's follow-up article was brutal. The Fall of a Financial Executive: How Stolen Work Became a House of Cards. She'd somehow obtained interviews with multiple former employees who corroborated the pattern of theft and deception. The story went viral in financial circles, But my masterstroke was yet to come. Among the evidence I'd submitted anonymously was a detailed comparison of Thomas's published articles and presentations with original work by Jessica Warren. The similarities weren't just suspicious, they were plagiarism. The Financial Strategy Institute, which had honored Thomas with their Rising Leader Award based on those materials, launched their own investigation. Within a month, Thomas faced federal fraud charges, multiple civil lawsuits, revocation of his professional certifications, industry-wide blacklisting, personal bankruptcy from legal fees. I submitted Maverick's final invoice to Braxton and Howe and prepared to leave. On my last day, I stopped by the office that had once been mine, then Thomas's, now empty and stripped of his awards and photographs. The view of Chicago's skyline remained unchanged, but everything else had shifted. Sarah Kim found me there. "Ms. Langford, I wanted to thank you before you left." "For what?" "For showing us that the truth matters. Jessica Warren trained me when I first started. She was brilliant and kind. What happened to her was wrong." Sarah paused. "Wherever she is, I hope she knows that justice was finally served." I smiled behind my glasses. "I'm sure she knows." My phone buzzed with a message from one of my partners. Another potential client, major pharmaceutical company, suspicious about their CFO's background. Interested? "Send me the details," I typed back. As I walked through Braxton and Howe's lobby for the last time, I passed a new display showcasing their commitment to ethics and integrity. The irony was delicious. They'd paid me handsomely to expose the rot in their system, never knowing the exterminator had once lived in these walls. Outside, Chicago's wind whipped around me as I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the tower that had once been my entire world, somewhere in the city. Thomas Keene was meeting with lawyers, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his stolen success. His reputation was destroyed, his fortune gone, his future a series of court dates and depositions. He'd probably spend years wondering who had orchestrated his downfall. The anonymous whistleblower who'd known exactly where to look. The consultant who'd guided every investigation to its most damaging conclusion. The ghost who'd waited 6 years for the perfect moment to strike. Let him wonder. Let him lose sleep searching for an enemy he'd never recognize. Because he'd never truly seen me, even when I was right in front of him. Building the very foundation he'd claimed as his own. Justice had been served. Not by the system that had failed me, but by my own careful hand. And Jessica Langford had other corporate predators to hunt. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of my new office in Manhattan, watching the sun paint the skyline gold. Maverick Ethical Consulting had expanded to 3 cities. Our reputation built on the Braxton and Howe case. We were the firm companies called when they needed the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Thomas's trial had concluded 2 weeks ago. 20 counts of fraud, guilty on all charges. 7 years in federal prison, millions in restitution. The news coverage showed him in an orange jumpsuit, his Harvard MBA and executive suits replaced by a number. I'd watched the verdict from my apartment, feeling neither joy nor sadness, just completion. My assistant knocked. "Ms. Langford, your 3 o'clock is here. Send them in." The client was another Fortune 500 company, another executive they suspected of building success on others' bones. I listened to their concerns, took notes, already mapping the investigation in my mind. This was my work now, ensuring that the Thomas Keenes of the world couldn't hide behind stolen achievements and corporate politics. After the meeting, I returned to the terrace. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Sarah Kim had been promoted to Director of Financial Strategy at Braxton and Howe, the position that should have been mine years ago. Her message was brief, following in the footsteps of a great mentor I never properly met. "Thank you for showing us the way." I smiled and archived the message. Jessica Warren was gone, but her legacy lived on in every analyst who now knew their work would be protected, their contributions recognized. The system that had failed me had been forced to change. Alexandra Voss joined me on the terrace, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Celebrating something?" "Just thinking," I said, accepting the glass. About? About how they never apologized. Not the board, not HR, not anyone who enabled him. Alexandra sipped her champagne. Did you need them to? I considered the question, looking out at the city where I'd rebuilt myself. The truth was, I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need their recognition or validation. I'd taken back something far more valuable, my power. The power to ensure that merit mattered, that theft had consequences, that the Thomas Keanes of the world couldn't climb on the backs of the Jessica Warrens anymore. No, I said finally. I don't need anything from them. My phone rang. Another potential client, another corporation with secrets they needed exposed. I let it go to voicemail. There would always be more cases, more predators in suits thinking they were untouchable. But for now, I wanted to stand here in the dying light, remembering the woman who'd believed that integrity beats politics every time. She'd been wrong about that. But she'd been right about something else. Success was sweeter when you earned it. And I'd earned every bit of this. The view, the reputation, the knowledge that somewhere in a federal prison, a man who'd stolen everything from me was finally paying the price. I raised my glass to the window, to my reflection that showed a woman transformed by purpose rather than broken by betrayal. No one had given me justice. I'd taken it myself, one methodical step at a time, using the very system that had failed me as my weapon. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of justice, deep purple bruises fading to rose gold redemption. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges. But tonight, I stood exactly where I needed to be, on top of an empire built not on lies or theft, but on the fundamental truth that everyone, eventually, faces a reckoning. Mine had come 6 years ago in a conference room when they told me I was too soft to lead. Thomas's had come in a courtroom when they told him he was guilty on all counts. And somewhere between those two moments, Jessica Warren had died and Jessica Langford had been born. Not softer, not harder, but perfectly calibrated for the work that needed to be done. I finished my champagne as the city lights began to twinkle, each one a reminder that the world was full of stories like mine. People waiting for their moment of justice. Maybe they'd find it in the courts. Maybe they'd find it in karma. Or maybe, like me, they'd realize that sometimes you have to become the architect of your own redemption, building it carefully from the ashes of who you used to be. The night was young, and I had work to do. Thank you so much for listening to my story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know what city or country you're in so we can connect. If you enjoyed this tale of patience and calculated payback, please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And I'm curious, what did you think of Jessica's 10-year plan? Was her revenge justified, or did she go too far? Share your thoughts below, and let's discuss how far you would go to reclaim what was stolen from you.